And so without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator and first speaker, the fabulous, the wonderful, and backed by popular demand, Mr. Clayton Dube. Clay has been to China so many times. How many times have you gone in the last year, Clay? So you can't even remember. It's that many times. He was just there a couple weeks ago. 7 times in the last year. So, and not only that, but he also is very much, it's not just a coincidence that he's at USC, because he's won awards for his teaching. So if you want to know anything about teaching practice and teaching modern China, contemporary China, walk up to him and ask him. So to welcome Clay, who's going to be talking about where we are right now, with U.S.-China relations. Thank you, Clay. Clayton Dube.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be back here. I heard all sorts of well-deserved thanks for the Institute, for its leaders, for our interlopers from the Asia Society, who I greatly admire. All of them have deep, deep experience in China, and it's a privilege. I'm going to be making reference to 2 Asia Society projects in my presentation, which will eventually be part of the show. I want to say, certainly thanks to those folks, but frankly, more than that, thanks to each of you. They put this together. You choose to be here. You choose to give up the most precious thing any of us have, which is time. And maybe the most precious time is summertime. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being part of this effort. Thanks for what you do every day in your classrooms. We really do appreciate it. And this whole show is for you. Sort of. We're using you. We're trying to use you to get to your students, because we think it's important that they have a deeper understanding of China today and of the complex relationship that the United States has with China. And we want you to sneak that in. There are places where you are supposed to do it. Devin will be talking about some of those. I'll maybe make some reference. But the fact of the matter is, we use guerrilla tactics here. There are ways to slip this in anything that you teach. Maybe you can start to keep a diary of how China and America's relationship with China infiltrated your lessons. There are so many ways to do that. And it belongs. You can teach so many different subjects. You can help your students develop so many different skills using China today and the U.S.-China relationship. And so we want to thank you for being here. And also, I'm going to put out a special request. I'm operating on 3 hours of sleep. I need you to lend me some energy. Let's talk about innovation, and let's talk about China. And let's talk about school kids. Okay. We were going to watch a few seconds of the most energetic middle school principal I've seen in a long time. In middle schools and high schools and elementary schools, the day begins with morning exercises. And students get a little bored with the same thing. And so this particular teacher, and you'll get to see it sometime in this lifetime, came up with really sophisticated dance steps. So much so that what? Parents show up to videotape it, to record it. We're going to just push past it. Oh, this is slide 3? Perfect. Okay. So what I mentioned product placement. This is the first such instance. So this is the Institute Facebook page. And the reason I'm drawing your attention to it is we had a very popular post over the last week that focused on the question that we're talking about this morning. And so the next slide deals with that post. And the question is American policy towards China. And it happens to be a hot button issue right now. And so one of the things that we addressed is with the current administration has taken a more aggressive stance towards China. It's defined China as a rival in its national security strategy. And I have some quotes from that national security strategy, which highlight some of the issues that the Trump administration has with China. It has other issues with Russia and some other places, but China is at the center of this. And I've studied the national security strategies that have been issued by successive administrations going back 30 years to Ronald Reagan's administration, and focused on the China component therein. So eventually you'll get to see that. I promise. But the first thing I'd like to highlight is there are 3 references that are included. The first of those references is to an Asia Society report prepared by a task force together with the University of California at San Diego, talking about a course correction. Now, the first such study was done in 2017. The one I'm making reference to and have a link to is from February of this year. And I would encourage you to take a look at it. It's called course correction. Clearly, what that suggests is there's a need for a new approach to China, a new American approach to China. And that report details several suggested changes. Some of these are in accord with what the administration is doing, some are not. Just a couple weeks ago, in the Washington Post, a group of China watchers, former government officials, academics, some business people, they signed an open letter. The title of their open letter is "China is not an enemy." And in an op-ed, you have 800 words, so it's not a very extensive document, but it highlights some of the ways that the United States and China have worked together in the past and should work together in the future. It acknowledges that China's actions, China's policies, are not ones that are necessarily welcomed by most Americans. No? Okay, we're eventually going to get there. In response to that letter, so you can see where this is going, in response to that letter, signed by former ambassadors, former assistant secretaries of state, major figures in academia and business, there was a counter letter to President Trump saying, stay the course. You're on the right track. Don't listen to those people. Don't listen to those folks who believe that engagement is the answer. Listen instead to those who argue for, and here's a vocabulary word, decoupling. So the 2 words for this first session are engagement and decoupling. What does decoupling mean? Decoupling means reducing areas of collaboration. Economic, security, environment, a whole host of things. And the basic argument in this third document, and you could share all three with your students, the basic argument in this third document is that what the United States and China have sought to do hasn't worked out for America. It's worked out for China, but not so much on the American side. So that's the basic framework. And so the title of this morning's presentation is Recalibrating US-China Relations. Everybody is calling for some sort of adjustment. A harder line, a softer line, a mix. And so let's talk about what has brought us to this point. It's 2019. 40 years ago, China, and to an extent the United States, embarked on a new beginning. In December of 1978, China initiated its economic reforms. China and the United States formalized a diplomatic relationship, and both of these have been sort of almost celebrated in China. I've participated in some conferences in China about these subjects. The US-China diplomatic relationship is problematic. And so we made, together with CCTV, a 10-part series on US-China relations. We finished it in 2014. It hasn't aired. The party has to decide what the relationship is today before it discusses what it has been. So that's a little bit problematic. 40 years of economic reforms have been celebrated. But some of those reforms are being de-emphasized today. We'll talk about that. Now, the third giant policy change initiated at that time is one that isn't being marked in China. But all of you know about it. The implementation of family planning. What in America is frequently called the one-child family program. That was initiated also in 1978. And it reshaped China in dramatic ways. I hope some of you will watch the new documentary that's coming out on Amazon called One Child Nation that deals with that. There have been no celebrations of that anniversary on the pages of People's Daily. The policy, as you know, in 2015 shifted. You can have 2 kids. But of course, by now, most people don't want 2 kids because they can't afford them. And so the joke is, well, at least they're not making us have 2 kids. In any case, 3 giant policy shifts. Okay? So that's part of where we are. Let me see. Oh, isn't this cool? Okay. So we've talked about this, the national security strategy, the course correction, the Asia Society task force report, the China is not an enemy letter, and the China is an enemy letter, stay the course, President Trump, all of these. And you can check those out, again, via that post. There's links to those. We spent a lot of time at the USChina Institute naturally focusing on these things and had a big conference on this. on China in American policy and China in American politics. We are, don't you feel lucky, in the midst of another presidential campaign. China isn't at the center of that right now, but it likely will play a prominent role because of its connection to the economic uncertainty that many Americans feel. And one of the places that you can track this and track a bunch of other things is another of our Facebook pages teaching about Asia. We welcome all of you to become members of that group. Yes?
Maybe you're going to address this, but how do you gauge China's interest in American policies?
China is intensely interested in American policy. Diplomats and others are forever asking for an explanation of what that policy is. Part of it is because of a certain lack of clarity, certain confusion, mixed messages, and also there's wishful thinking that the current policy is not the one that will continue. So we're going to get to where we are now, but let's say a thing or two about what was. What was the relationship? When Nixon went and when Carter established diplomatic relations, part of the calculation, of course, was China was a bulwark against the Cold War enemy, Soviet Union. And so part of that geopolitical strategy worked into the outreach to China. And in fact, President Reagan was one of the foremost collaborators with China on this, authorizing the release of all sorts of intelligence data, satellite information, things like that. And the Chinese welcomed it. We had CIA stations in northern China monitoring the Soviet Union. So there was a lot of that. We collaborated in bringing the Taliban to power in Afghanistan, driving the Soviets out and that sort of thing. The two sides were geopolitical partners. So that's what was. But of course, the Soviet Union disappears. And China rises. That's the short story of what now. What next is something you and I and others need to talk about. Now again, we have been here before. At the end of the 19th century, you have this racist California publication, the WASP, complaining about low tariffs on Japanese and Chinese imports. So these issues are not entirely new. In fact, more recently, these tensions have popped up. President Bush imposed tariffs on steel. President Obama put tariffs on automobile and truck tires. And The Economist magazine weighed in on that. Did they like what Obama did? They called him a vandal. America's mad, crazy trade war with China. So we have been here. But now, let's watch some popular TV. Let's go to Scranton, Pennsylvania. The Office. Now, in fact, it was filmed in Van Nuys, down where I live, but it captured a moment. So, Michael Scott, now it's important to keep in mind that this episode, Michael is not the genius in the group. And part of what this episode is about is he's late to the party, late to getting this information. And if the kid wasn't reading the other magazine, he never would have gotten it. Okay? And then what's he say? America's number one. I have this fantasy of going to Belize or someplace and asking people, what number is Belize? Only a couple places talk in these terms and have foam fingers to support them, right? That kind of thing. What is it about America that we think in these terms? And what is it about Michael? This is from 2010. And by the way, this is, as you folks know, it's not some marginal TV show. This was the 11th most popular program in America in 2010, and it's still streaming on Netflix. If you fly United, as I have a lot recently, it's streaming there too. Okay? England is number 2. So Michael Scott is not an economist. We know that he's not up on GDP figures. And in 2010, of course, China's economy was number 2 to the United States. But we see he is a follower, he is not a leader. Because let's look at this survey about American attitudes about who's in charge. Which country is the leading economic power in the world? And what? In 2000, over 65% of Americans said it's the United States. Fast forward to 2009, so a year before Michael gets an old magazine in the waiting room, what do we see? A plurality of Americans identified China as the leading economic power in the world. How is this? In terms of standard GDP numbers, China wasn't. But why did Americans say, I get this note about halfway, and we're on slide 5 of 118, so it will be fast. In any case, what had changed? What had changed by 2009? Your students weren't born, some of them, but what had changed by 2009? Shout it out. Yeah. In China, we had witnessed this tremendous economic growth as manifested in the Beijing skyline, the successful Beijing Olympics, that sort of thing. And what? Look at this. Per capita GDP growth. If you're Chinese, this is almost straight up, right? This is astonishing. And Americans are lousy with numbers, but they had a sense of this direction. And so they were capturing that direction. And they were impressed by the Olympics, the opening show with Li Ning flying through space. And a month after the Olympics, Lehman Brothers goes down. The financial crisis is dominating the front pages. Unemployment shoots up. And we've been on a long track downward since then. So this gray area is the recession, where unemployment rises dramatically. In January 2009, GM, General Motors, announces it's closing 14 plants. If you live in those states, you know what that means. And academia, ever helpful, Harvard Business School comes out with a pocket manual to help managers do what? Laying off employees. That's the kind of thing that The Onion would publish, right? Okay, that should be satire, but it's a legitimate business school publication, right? George Clooney makes a movie on the same theme, but that's tongue-in-cheek. America's unhappy. Well, as it turns out, so is China. China's unhappy too. This is a best-selling book that next year, Unhappy China. And China's unhappy for all sorts of reasons. Well, in the United States, some of the unhappiness, it didn't stem from this. When somebody tells you manufacturing is dead, when Michael Scott in the office says, we don't make things anymore, he's wrong. American manufacturing continues to rise. We're second only to China in terms of manufacturing output. But people working in manufacturing is declining. You can see that it peaked in the 90s and has been on a downward trend since then. Why? Why? Automation and, frankly, the movement of jobs to lower cost countries. First Mexico, later China and other places, right? But automation is a big factor. How many of you called a travel agent to book your last trip? You sit down with the travel agent, have a lot of back and forth. You did. Okay, there we go. You're doing your share. Nobody tell him about the web. But that's an example. Think about all of the other things that technology has lessened the need for human hands. Not just here. China is now the #1 buyer of robots. The company that has the most robots in the world, Foxconn. Taiwanese company, giant city manufacturing facilities in China. Now this is what, we get a lot of Chinese scholars and officials who come to talk to us about, saying, please just tell us the secret. And I tell them, this trade war is not about the trade balance. And they don't believe me. And I know that, and I accept that. I wouldn't believe me either, because our president talks about nothing but the trade balance. He describes it as theft. Okay. He's very familiar with these charts. And of course, the trade balance, trade has increased, and the gap between what we import and what we export has increased too. So this is the focus. The president's not aware of steadily rising American exports of services, or at least doesn't publicly recognize that. This war is not about the economy of today. It's not about the trade balance. The Chinese have already said, we'll buy every soybean you can grow. That's not what the issue is. The issue is not today's economy, but tomorrow's. That's where the big shift is. And most Americans have a little bit of awareness of this, but it's not as clear as the trade balance question. This guy knows about it, though. Former head of Goldman Sachs, former secretary of the US Treasury. It was his job, by the way. He was in some of those newspapers when the economy melted down. And last year, he gave a speech at this important meeting of capitalists where he said, something's changed. People like me who know China, who support China, who make money in China, we have changed. We are now advocating for a more confrontational approach to China. How can that be? We were the ones that used to advocate for collaboration, for cooperation. What has changed? He asks, and I repeat. Oh, sorry, Can we go back? Okay. Don't worry, video's coming. 中国制造 2025. Made in China 2025. Now, this is a state program. The Chinese government plans. And so they said, we want to develop our industries of tomorrow. And it puts forward specific targets. We want to have a certain share of the electric car market in China and worldwide. We want to have a certain share of semiconductor production. We want to have a certain share of artificial intelligence. We want to be a leading force in robotics and that sort of thing. And so these documents come out in 2015. And mostly Americans, vast majority of Americans don't know about this, don't care. Why should they? Well, the Chinese government thinks you should. So much so that they made this propaganda video. Sure. We may need to nudge it. And you'll get the chorus. Feel free to sing.
Hey, have you guys heard what's going on in China?
President Xi Jinping's new style?
Yes, and there's more.
The Shisanu. The what?
China's 13th five-year plan.
They got
Yeah,
people who
the
think it's not
Shisanu.
Oh.
Every 5 years in China, man, they make a new development plan. The time has come for number 13. Shisanu, that's what it means.
It's a huge deal. Like how huge?
Huge.
Like China huge?
Yeah, China huge.
Oh, that's really big.
Wanna know what China's gonna do? Let's pay attention to the Shisanu, the Shisanu, the Shisanu,
The Shisanu what?
the Shisanu.
But who makes all the plans?
There's government ministers and think tank minds and party leadership contributing fines. There's doctors, bankers, and farmers too, and even engineers who deal with poo.
Ew, did I hear that right?
Yeah, it's true. Chorus.
If you wanna know what China's gonna do, let's pay attention to
Sure, San Wu. Okay, sing it, sing it. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Boom it out. Now, the 13th five-year plan comes out at roughly the same time as Made in China 2025, but they're not the same. They're not the same. They are slightly different. This is geared towards the next five, is the period 2016 to 2020. It includes the targets outlined in the 2025 goal, but 2025 obviously has this longer time frame. And so the Chinese government paid to have this thing made to get people to pay attention to this. State planning. Boy, did they regret it. Because what happened? The US-China Business Council, the US Chamber of Commerce, the Europeans, everybody said, okay, let's read this thing. What's in it? And they issue reports saying, yeah, we don't like it. We don't like it. It suggests that China's government, in its determination to achieve these aims, is going to do what? It's going to favor its own development, its own companies through subsidies, preferential treatment in terms of procurement, things like this, and perhaps discriminate against foreigners. And if foreigners don't like that, they start complaining. And they complain to their governments, and they complain wherever they can. One of the people who listens carefully is now the U.S. Trade Representative, Robert Lighthizer. Not just to this, he's been a hardliner on trade going back to the Reagan administration. So is Trump. They are kindred spirits. Lighthizer was involved in the deals with Japan, and Trump took out a full-page ad in the New York Times to complain about Reagan being soft on Japan. Okay, we went from, okay. A think tank in Germany, in Berlin, the Mercator Institute, produced a report about 2025. And it gets a lot of attention, and as a result, the head of it is banned from going to China. But that's a side note. This is a heat map. And it's full of speculation. There are a lot of ifs. But the suggestion here is that if China is successful with the 2025 program, who's going to suffer? Which countries are at greatest risk? And the closer you fly to the sun, that's a problem. So who's at greatest risk, according to this? South Korea, the Czech Republic, Germany. This is a German think tank, okay? See, we're on the edge here. We're going to melt, okay? The United States, we're in the SP30 realm, I guess, SPF 30, suntan. So we're going to get burned, but if you're Luxembourg, it's not a problem. Luxembourg, of course, is known for, yeah, there must be something. And I don't mean to insult Luxembourg, but it's a small player. And it's not an industrial superpower. It survives by trading, by niche products, okay? Whereas you see Japan, South Korea, Germany, those are giant economies. And they see this and they say, what? And so they start fixating on that and start complaining about these policies. When it was toothbrushes that China produced, it wasn't a giant concern. When it could be autonomous vehicles, it becomes a giant concern. And China is investing in developing its production. It needs to. And that's what I'm here to tell you, is that all of this makes sense if you're the Chinese government. Because what is happening in China? China's aging. In a year or two, the median age in China is going to be higher than the United States. We're an old country, and we're worried about how we're going to pay for all of me. Maybe it's only me that's worried. But anyway, how is this going to work? China faces the same challenge with a per capita GDP about a sixth the size of the United States. How are they going to afford that? The only way, China has already peaked in terms of its labor force. From here on out, China's labor force is going to decline in size. So what does China have to do? It has to get more out of less, more out of its workers, and use less energy and do all of these kinds of things. It has to increase productivity. It has to innovate. It needs research. And so the Chinese government's investing in research. As a share of GDP, they are not quite to the level of the OECD countries, and they're a long way from the United States still, but they are rising. And what do you see about the United States? Kind of flat, kind of flat. This is collective investment in our future. We just marked the 50th anniversary of American astronauts tooling around on the moon. That involved a lot of research, a lot of speculation, a big investment. We're not investing in that same way anymore. China is. China is rising. It's expanding the number of kids in school dramatically. When I taught in China in the early 1980s, China had fewer college students than California. Think about that. Our state, apologies to the Nevadans and people from Georgia, had more college students in the early 1980s than China, the entire giant country of 1 billion at that time, had. they've ramped up the number of students. They're investing in their future. And of course, some of those students come to the United States. 380,000, about 330,000 in universities, 50,000 in pre-collegiate programs. Try to get Americans to go. We go to England, where the language is a little bit foreign. Spanish, where the language is a little bit foreign. China's number 5. We need to increase the number of students. You can help. You can take your students. You can encourage students to go. So this is a list of American complaints, American business complaints about increasing problems doing business in China. We won't go through them. But let's talk about Chinese investment in the United States. This is a giant story. The Asia Society and other organizations have followed this closely, and there's good documentation. In my neighborhood, we have BYD. The English name is Bring Your Dreams. That's not the Chinese name, but anyway. Here's an electric bus that they manufacture in Shenzhen. Here is them manufacturing it in a poor city in Los Angeles County. They've got hundreds of people employed in making these buses, which have all kinds of quality control problems. Let's be upfront about that. But they're on the streets of Long Beach, Seattle, some other places. That's investment. How about Chinese visitors? Steady increase until when? Well, yeah, Donald Trump. That's part of it, but I think it's actually a tiny part of it. I think the economic slowdown in China is the bigger factor here. And what has happened? The Chinese currency has slipped about 7 or 8% compared to the American dollar. And so without anything else happening, it became 7 or 8% more expensive to come. I'm chuckling because I got a time sign. Chinese spend a lot of money. Not just at theme parks and outlet malls, but a lot of it there. Chinese investment is not a news story. You had this company, Hayar, come to the United States in the 90s. South Carolina. Most recently, this company that's going to make fiberglass, located, and they broke ground on a new plant in South Carolina. The two other pictures that are up here, one is of the Volvo plant. Volvo is a Chinese company now. And they built a big plant in South Carolina to export Volvos to China and to sell them here. And the biggest export from South Carolina to China? BMWs. BMWs. That's down here. South Carolina is like the 5th or 6th largest exporting state to China. Investment, changing the skyline in San Francisco. This is an example of a changing skyline in Los Angeles. But what's happened to that investment? It has disappeared. It went up fast, it came down faster. We are not a Belt and Road priority. And Chinese companies having trouble in the domestic economy have less ability to move money to the United States. Investment from China into the United States has collapsed. And part of it is political, part of it is economic. Americans are still desperate to get it. All kinds of delegations trying to attract it, but there's less of it. Here in California, we've been the preeminent destination. In 2016 alone, more than $16 billion. Wow. In 2018, not 16 billion. A whole lot less than 1 billion. But we've received a lot, better than 30 billion. Now, how about California investment in China? Over $50 billion. These California companies have invested and are making money for the most part in China. Most American businesses are making money. That's why they're in China. That's why they still want to be there, although the climate is getting more difficult. I don't need to tell people here that Chinese home buyers are dropping in, but fewer of them. See this fall, $30 billion. Individual Chinese were investing more than corporate China in the United States, buying houses. But it's fallen dramatically in the last year. We have all kinds of news coverage. Wanda has put up stuff for sale. They mostly have made money or broken even. But other Chinese companies are also selling. Yeah, we're the odd couple. Now, I show you this slide and this cover from The Economist for one basic purpose. Yeah, we are a weird couple, no question about it. We are married. But also look at the symbols. Uncle Sam, okay, Uncle Sam has been a stand-in for more than 100 years. Uncle Sam, remember, was staring at that low tariff wall in 1896. But who's the symbol for China? Mao. Okay, math. It's 2019, 2009 then, 2009 then, 2019, Mao died in 1976. How long ago was that? Now, I could put it a different way. I could ask how many people were alive when Mao died. But that might be cruel. I wouldn't do that. More than 40 years. And yet we still use Mao as the symbol of China. I think we can be excused because so do the Chinese. On Chinese currency, it's Mao, Mao, and more Mao. Mao still looks down from Tiananmen. So maybe we can be excused for being stuck on a bad symbol. But how about these others? Star, Great Wall, the dragon fighting with Trump. Can pandas fly? But my personal favorite, and I'm sure he didn't choose the cover, because I greatly respect James Fallows, but whoever the art director was for The Atlantic, China crumbles. What symbol do they use? That symbol manufactured somewhere in California. I come from LA, so you're not going to claim credit for it here, although people try. Right? Crumbling fortune cookies. Ridiculous. What do Americans think about trade? Who knows? Most Americans think trade is good, but not uniformly good. Because what has happened? Globalization. First big message on globalization is that it has led to the rise of the middle class in China, that middle class that can send kids to China, that middle class that can buy houses in China, that middle class that can go to Disneyland. Happiest place on earth, I've heard. But what has been the impact here? Low skill but decent wage jobs are fewer and fewer. Those manufacturing jobs. Right? So there's a tension. There's a tension. And here we have surveys from Gallup, from Chicago Council, from Pew, suggesting that most Americans think trade is good, but not unreservedly good. Xi Jinping. What he will want on his tombstone, wait and see, is that he brought about the rejuvenation of China. That during his time, China Fuxing, this revitalization, revival, that's the China dream, according to Xi Jinping. This is the official China Dream website. Can't be official without a website. That China Dream includes utilizing the Belt and Road Initiative, and that has led to tension with certain places. Americans have been nervous. This is a port, it was kind of a vanity project in Sri Lanka, and it's now wound up under Chinese administration. So some people worry that the Belt and Road is a shell game to sucker countries in. I don't think that's true, but in any case, that's one of the worries. So American business complains that China is not open. Here is an annual survey done by the OECD on openness. And you can see China is the red bar at the more closed end of the scale. The US is the blue bar, not up to the average, but more open than China. Okay? Let's look at some numbers. China has become much more open, according to this survey. A decade ago, roughly half open, half closed. Today, about a quarter open. Or I'm sorry, 3/4 open, a quarter closed. In specific sectors, some of those are completely closed, some are completely open. You want to make stuff, China's totally open. Even electricity, mostly open. You want to start a newspaper, start a radio station, yeah, not happening. Okay? So these kinds of things. Foreign investment in China has dropped, especially from the United States and from Europe. It peaked up just a little bit this last year, but it's still slow. I'm going to have to skip through. This is all about changing China and the importance of geography. China's unequal development. This may be something that Mark talks about in a little bit. It matters where you're born. On average, you're going to live a lot longer if you are born in a richer place. We can talk about this. I'm going to skip through this stuff. So China is a big exporting country, big news. So is the United States. China is a big importer. The US is the #1 importer. We are the biggest trading countries, no question. This is too complicated for me to talk about right there. We fight in the WTO. We win some, we lose some. We won on agriculture. We lost on steel. Just a decision made just a month ago. What does American business want? Really comes down to this question. The hope for American and other foreign companies in China is to be treated like Chinese companies. Now, some of that is happening. These American companies are supposed to have Communist Party committees now. That's not quite what they were going for. But they wanted to be treated the same. And the Chinese approach is different. They say, we will treat you like we treat all other foreign companies. And that's not enough, according to American business. That's the basic issue. The United States is mostly open to Chinese investment. There are some things that we won't let you buy. There's some things we get nervous about if you do buy. I've got some videos on that, but we're not going to be able to see all of that. These are more of my collection of stereotypes. Who's afraid of Huawei? Are you afraid of Huawei? Who has a Huawei phone? No hands. No hands. We're going to skip. Okay, so the Chinese media for a long time didn't really go heavy into the trade war, but now it's heavy into it. okay, and looking at it. You had on CCTV these ancient films that were shown in prime time on CCTV because these deal with fighting the United States. When? When did we fight? Korean War. Korean War. And so suddenly on CCTV, you're supposed to watch this stuff. Of course, nobody does. Nobody does. They watch something else. These are Chinese cartoons. I had to skip over this. Okay. Well, I have no idea what number slide I'm on, but I'm quite certain I have 60 more. Here's the big issue. So we've talked a little bit about the economy. So that's a giant issue. But one reason that this has been elevated in a way that it never was elevated in the trade conflict with Japan of the 1980s is because China's a different country. First of all, it's 10 times bigger than Japan. Size matters. Also, it's what? It's not a democracy. It's not an American ally today, as it was in the 70s. We didn't have a formal treaty with China, but we collaborated. And we told the Soviets that if they were to use nuclear weapons against China, we would use nuclear weapons against them. China has a different political system. And I have about 10 slides here about, I really want to show them. Oh, yeah, we're going to skip this. Yeah, cyber warfare. It's real. Yes, the Chinese army is still spying on you. Okay. So when the People's Republic was founded, Mao had 3 of the jobs. Zhou Enlai had the premiership. And then after the disaster of the Great Leap Forward that you're going to hear about later today, Mao loses that job to Liu Shaoqi, something he won't forget and will punish Liu for a few years later. But you have that shift. But after Mao dies, the big reforms engineered by Deng Xiaoping and his group were what? Collective leadership. Not just in terms of decision making, but in terms of actual jobs. And so in the early 80s, we divided it up. I had nothing to do with it. Zhao Ziyang was the premier at the outset, becomes party secretary. Hu Yaobang is general secretary. Li Xiannian is the state president, okay? And Deng Xiaoping has the real cards. He's the party's boss of the military, okay? This was political reform. This was moving away from not from highly centralized control. It was still a Leninist state, but it wasn't a one-person state. But today, Xi Jinping is chairman of everything. Of the party, of the state, of the Central Military Commission. And only one of these jobs had a term limit, and that term limit was abolished. So some people, in fact, we had a meeting with the Asia Society a week ago, 2 weeks ago, where a Chinese diplomat said it was a reform to do away with term limits. And I said, it is a change, but many people see it as a step backward. And on the street, it's pretty clear what people think. In this market, what do people think? Xi Jinping out in front. And I've never met him. I'm likely never to meet him. I don't know if he's as stiff and as thin-skinned as our leader. But I do know that the people who work for him think he is, and they're preventing this kind of play that Chinese came up with at the time. So now, you know this if you were here last year, one of our students shared his picture of what? Winnie the Pooh was in jail at the subway, right? Somebody had a Winnie the Pooh thing, and they said, no, not allowed. You're making a political statement. And China's state media is one tone, right? Same pictures, same stories, different fonts. Meanwhile, American journalists, of course, are curtailed, while China uses American social media to get its message out. So there's a lot of tension. The Asia Society has been monitoring the economic reforms put forward by the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee in 2013. And this is the progress, or lack thereof, as of this spring. You can see that in many areas, what the party said it wanted to do, it has not done. And in fact, there's a lot of sensitivity. And this gets to the "you started it" question. Now, you've never heard "you started it" in your classroom, have you? Is it your favorite thing? Probably not. But that's where the United States and China are right now. Each is saying, you started it. You started it. Here's my take. The two countries are different today than they were in the 70s, than they were at the start of this century. China has changed much more dramatically. And that has changed the configuration. It's been a good thing for China. It's been a good thing for America. But now it's leading to a lot of friction. And the question today is, how do we move forward? Can we move forward? And I'm way out of time, so I'm not going to share with you what I think. But I want to come back to the different political systems, because this weighs heavily in the United States' approach to China. Human rights violations have gotten worse in China. Most people are freer in China than when I first lived there in the start of the 1980s. Much freer. They do what they want. They say mostly what they want. But there are things that are not allowed that people want. So, for example, when women said, "Stop molesting us on the bus," it was okay that they said it until they made signs, until they organized. Then they went to jail. And their lawyers have gone to jail. And 1 million people have been what? Profiled and put into detention centers, preventative detention, so that they can learn to be something that they apparently are not now. This is stunning. The United States did this. We, of course, have slavery, we have segregation, we have the internment of Japanese and Japanese Americans. All of that. We have plenty of ethnic issues in our country today. Detentions on the border, all kinds of stuff. But it is important to stand up and to point these things out. China doesn't have to make the same mistakes we have made. China should be better, and we owe it to them and to ourselves to raise these issues. I haven't talked about Taiwan. Taiwan's having a giant election too. You want to talk more about that? I'm back in San Francisco a week from today. Different hotel somewhere near the airport. Somewhere in the slides, and if you ask me, I can tell you where it is. It's free. In any case, it should be interesting. And if you don't like me, there are much better people. Really. Here and there. Okay, the reason I get to go first is so that you can have some good stuff later. Haven't talked about Hong Kong, where people who have had the temerity to demonstrate are now getting beat up on the metro by thugs. All of that is here. and I apologize for not getting to all of it. And it's time for a break, but let me use the power of the mic to invite questions for 5 minutes. Then we'll have a 10-minute break, and then you'll get to hear from Professor Mark Henderson. Any questions? Please, Devin.
During the time when China was investing heavily in the United States, South Carolina, what was the motivation for that when they was trying to do investment and development in China itself? Why would they come here where labor costs?
To get closer to the market. So the question was, why would China invest in South Carolina to manufacture automobiles and that sort of thing? And the short answer, with regard to the Hayar, they manufacture mainly dorm refrigerators, things like that. And they've recently purchased General Electric. You've heard of that brand? Yeah, they now manufacture, they now own the General Electric appliance business. They were not making any kind of dent overall, and so they went out and bought a brand in the same way that Lenovo bought IBM's personal computer business. But the reason for investing in South Carolina is it's a right-to-work state, so the wages are lower, but the talent is there, and it's closer to the market. Okay, if you want to sell Volvos in America, it's easier to make them in America. Same thing with the BMW. That's why the Germans set up a BMW factory. But also, you have the Port of Charleston. It's on the wrong ocean, but in any case, they're able to get the cars to China. It's important to understand China is the world's largest automobile market. Audi sells 3 times more cars in China than it sells in the United States. BMW twice. Mercedes, something like that. So they're getting closer to the market. And part of it, too, is localization. The Japanese did this. That's why there's Toyota plant in Kentucky and Nissan in Tennessee and Mazda in Ohio and those kinds of things to get closer to the market. Also, what did I say before? Peak labor. Peak labor. American labor is more expensive than China, but if you factor in shipping and all this other stuff and the fact that some of the stuff might be manufactured here that you would first ship there and then ship back, it works. It works. Great question. Other comments, questions, please?
Why do some people do trade deficits? Is it harmful to the country to, if they reach a certain degree with trade deficits?
Okay, so the question is, why does anybody worry about something called a trade deficit? And the 2 responses. First, they shouldn't. It's a natural thing. I have a big trade deficit with Costco. I'm complaining about it. There'll be signs, okay? But it is the way, comparative advantage works that way. But also, people, when Donald Trump says they're ripping us off, it's not just that there's a deficit, but that what? The deficit exists because of unfair practices. And that is, of course, an issue. If you have things that prevent the export of medical devices or something into a place that keeps you from bumping that up. At the same time, some people, this trade deficit number is fictional in many respects because it's not just a trade deficit with China. In the case of phones and things like that, the semiconductors may have been manufactured here by Qualcomm or manufactured in Taiwan by a Qualcomm producer. The screens may have come from South Korea, other technologies, that sort of thing. So it's just that China sends the finished product to us. And so they get the full cost onto their bill, okay? And so many people argue that that number is, first of all, irrelevant, and secondly, it should be a lot smaller than what gets put out there. Certainly the people working on a Foxconn assembly line mostly can't afford to buy an Apple phone, okay? The worker and Foxconn together make about $14 for that $1,000 phone, okay? Yeah, the big money goes to Cupertino, we're here, and to the other suppliers. Other questions? please.
How does it add to the narrative where China is investing heavily in Africa right now? Does that cause like the U.S. to have an insecurity, seeing as the U.S. uses like Latin America in the same way? And so how does that change the narrative in any of this?
Yeah, part of when China initiates this Belt and Road and has this Belt and Road initiative, is America thinks, well, it must be a way of what? Of expanding. And in fact, it is. It's putting China at the center of an expanded market, access to resources, access to markets, access to labor, all of those things, all of those things. And, you know, America actually has more investments in Africa than China does, so does Britain, so does France, okay? A longer period, the Chinese money is newer and tends to be focused on infrastructure rather than some of these other things. Mark is going to be talking about some of that, I think, in just a little bit. But part of it is this notion of, well, we didn't pay attention to Africa, but if China is, we don't want them to be the dominant figure there. And so part of it is this geopolitical jockeying. And part of it is in Africa, and part of it has to do with energy, those sorts of things. I didn't even talk about the South China Sea and the tensions there, which are huge. I wanted to show you some interesting maps that have gotten people in jail. Other things, please. This is one of the longtime participants.
Professor Dube, it's always a pleasure. My question is something you said at the beginning. China does not want to decide how it presents its past before it decides its current status. Can you speak a little about how you might teach that to students about that dynamic?
Yeah, the joke is that the future we know with absolute certainty, it's going to be better. It's grand, it's glorious. That's where we're going if you're in China. Here, you know, different politicians put forward different images. But so the future is knowable. Of course, the future is not, but the future is knowable if you're a propaganda state. The past is problematic because the past is massaged to serve the present. So that's the issue about the past. In fact, China's rise has depended in large measure on the hard work of the Chinese people. But it's been aided by access to the richest market, ours. It's been aided by technology. Okay, so General Motors invested in China and shared its profits with the Shanghai Auto Corporation because that was the deal. They had to do that to go in. So you've gotten technology, you've gotten markets, you also got capital. China doesn't need the capital anymore. Still wants the technology, still needs the markets. Okay, so one of the things that's changing in China history telling, in the tale of the relationship in China, is that it's become much more uniformly negative. There's a lot of bad things. I didn't get to show you the Chinese exclusion cartoons. Okay? This country banned, you know, give us your tire, your poor, all that stuff, except if you're Chinese, right? So, yeah, we've had plenty of negative, right? But the good has also not been talked about as much as it once was. During the 1980s, it was a much more open time. And because of the demonstrations in 1989, the party decided, well, maybe that wasn't what we wanted, what the party wanted. Other questions? This will be the last one. I'm getting
all right,
daggers aimed at me.
I'm just wondering, what do you think is the reason that not a lot of American students want to go to China and study? I mean, I heard about when Japan was developing or something, lots of people want to learn Japanese at that time, and I was seeing the number of people going to China is like going down, even if it ever peaked at all.
Yeah, so American interest. I mean, the first problem is Americans are not as curious as we should be. I mean, that's the first thing. The biggest box office hit of a film that wasn't in English, even British English, was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And it made just $60 million in the United States. Okay, so that's a blimp. So we don't like to read subtitles. There's a lot of things. Americans are intellectually lazy, partly because we're rich, the country is big. You know, why go to China? I can go to Atlanta. And frankly, get just as lost because there's Peachtree this and Peachtree that. Okay? So part of it is just lack of curiosity. And other countries who don't, what did Michael Scott say? America's number one. Right? Other countries who don't have that drilled in are more open, more curious. They watch more cultural products. I mean, Friends, Big Bang Theory have had a disproportionate impact on Chinese views of America. Okay? Put your students to work on that. They'll hate you for it. Right. Yeah, watch sitcoms. What messages? You know, these are hugely popular in China. So part of it is that. So with regard to Japan, 3 waves. So first, of course, the Japanese were evil, World War II. Then what? We hated the samurai ethic, but then we loved samurai movies. After that, it was the business rise. And today, Japan is just cool. Anime, manga, Japan is cool. China has not, you know, despite the everybody loves pandas, despite that, China doesn't have that same appeal. The pollution, all of that sort of thing, the Black Mirror episode about social credit system, you know, these kinds of things. The image is pretty negative. So I just spent a couple days with 10 students from Chongqing, working with them in Los Angeles. Then they came up here. They came back. We had a dinner on Wednesday. And I said, okay, what's your takeaway? For all of them, first time in the United States. Many of them said, well, we really like the school. We like this. We like that. But the sky. Students in Los Angeles identified the sky as worthy of envy. America's number 2 polluted city. Go Houston. America's number 2 polluted city, and yet it was actually blue sky days. And they came up here and it was blue sky days. So there's a lot of factors. Stanford actually ended its undergraduate program in Beijing, even though they had this amazing facility, because they couldn't get students to go. Part of it is, you know, Silicon Valley students want internships here and stuff like that, but there were other factors. Pollution was probably one of those. I really need to stop. You need to get a chance to hear from people who know something. Thank you for your patience with our technical challenges. I'll follow you home tonight, show you the rest of the stuff. You folks have earned a break that's going to be counted in the seconds, but let's take a break. I apologize to Mark and to the Institute for running on, but I am really profoundly thankful to you.